Hey friends, family, followers, and subscribers. It's your fellow Winchester brother and man of letters, Bradford Schiebel here to, you guessed it, do another supernatural video. And today we are defending the long-running, now recently ended, fan favorite sci-fi show and why it is a fantastic show to watch. So, stay tuned. We're going to be going over some of the pros of the show and why it is defensible. And then that's going to be followed by a list of cons that come from a good place, ultimately. You know who you are, Andrew Dabb. However, still cause the show to be weak at points. But all that being said, I will add those cons and pros together to figure out how they stack against one another and ultimately decide whether or not the show is a good or bad investment in your time. That being said, let's get started. Reason number one I defend Supernatural is because there is a lot of great acting. And by that, I mean pretty much from the jump, you have a couple of slip-ups. Jensen's voice. In season 1, Jensen and Jared, who play Dean and Sam respectively, do a phenomenal job of bringing the gravitas, the pathos, and the history of Sam and Dean Winchester to screen. The reason why I say from the jump they're phenomenal actors is because they really take risks in how they portray their roles. And by that I mean later on down the line, yes, I forgot to mention, spoilers. That being said, you see Sam and Dean play multiple versions of themselves. You even see Sam play Lucifer. You see Dean play an archangel, and you see both of them play holier than thou versions of themselves and also twisted evil versions of themselves. And that's really interesting. But what really draws me to their acting, and this goes into a later point, is the overall performance that they give whenever one of the two brothers is going through a crisis. That being said, check out this link up here if you want to see a great example of Jensen Ackles' single manly tear. But, like I said, Jensen provides a lot of the heart of the show. And so what I mean by great acting is Jensen can go from joking around, drinking a beer with Sam, and then in a snap, he goes to crying. His speech catching and breaking over him telling his brother what he did in hell. And he does it flawlessly. And that takes real effort. If any actors out there who know what it's like to try to fake cry or even fake laugh, it is very difficult. And Jensen does it so believably. And so props to him, but also props to Jared for showing the internal struggles that Sam has throughout the series. And so speaking of that, the acting really portrays the high stakes of the show. And so by that, I mean, you go from this case of the week serialized TV show to a grand cosmic battleground between seasons 3 and 4. I mean, it literally goes from, Sam and Dean are hunting demons one season to the next season they're trying to prevent the apocalypse. And even one season they're trying to prevent Dean from becoming a killer, and then the next season they're fighting God's sister. Those stakes actually do have payoff in the long run. I'm looking at you, Swan Song. That's right. Those stakes ultimately do have very severe consequences in the end. I mean, they literally face off with God in the final season. So whether or not you agreed with it, it was still a fairly compelling story. So, that being said, yes, those stakes do pay off, especially in seasons 4 through 5, or 1 through 5, excuse me. Those stakes really do have significant consequences if everything goes wrong. That's one of the beauties of the show. On top of that, Sam and Dean are your chosen ones. Do they have the same flaws and complexities that Randall Thor has in The Wheel of Time? I might have discussed this in my top 10 favorite fantasy characters of all time with Dean, but Dean and Sam are your chosen ones. And you do see both brothers struggling with the weights pressed upon them by their destinies. In Sam, you see the boy who ran away from college, trying to get away from the life and trying to get away from a complicated family. And then you flip that around, you have Dean, self-loathing, self-hateful, but yet confident, smart as can be, emotional, and loyal to a fault, protecting the family name at all costs, but yet wants to live a normal life. That's one of the great juxtapositions and foils of the series, is that both Sam and Dean, in a very interesting way, their desires, not at first glance, are actually flipped. So you would think Dean would want to carry on the hunter's life. But in the end, spoiler warning, Dean dies. No! Yeah, you know the picture. Dean wants a normal life, and Sam wants to continue hunting. But at first glance, that's not what you think. And so that being said, there's the differences between the brothers do lead into a lot of great humor. Dean's always trying to pull pranks on Sam. You'll know the famous Dean says to Sam. Sam says jerk right back to him. It's just funny. Dean has some great one-liners. Sam has his moments where he's just the butt of the joke. And overall, there's crackling electric chemistry between the characters on the show. And not to mention, those characters really do dive into some interesting mythology throughout the series. You learn all kinds of urban legends, myths about some of the creatures that they hunt, ghosts, vampires, werewolves, witches, and then you get some really cool elements, like the introduction of angels, the introduction of demons, the introduction of God, Satan, the darkness, the empty, reapers, so on and so forth, alternate universes. And it just goes, the list goes on. I mean, literally the mythology of the show is, you could fill up a whole book on what it entails. You learn a lot of that really, really cool mythology over the run of the show. Demons are formed by the human soul going to hell and getting so twisted and corrupted by hell's darkest terrors. What that ends up doing is that it strips the human soul away from everything that makes it human: love, compassion, kindness, agency, self-control, restraint, all of those things, and turns it into something dark and creepy and not human. Angels can have their grace taken away. Angels can die. They can go to the empty. Archangels can open rifts to alternate dimensions, which is really cool. Some of those mythological elements do have some subversive moments, such as, one of my personal favorites, is when Dean and Sam go looking for the Michael sword at the beginning of season 5. You think it's a typical MacGuffin hunt, but as it turns out, Dean is actually the Michael sword. Why that's important and why that is a subversive element of the show is because they later learn that Sam is Lucifer's vessel. The paradoxes and the foils that go into both of Sam and Dean's characters really also parallel to Michael and Lucifer at the beginning of time. Two brothers, both who wanted to get the approval and affirmation of a distant father. And that's really interesting because if they both say yes to their respective archangels, yes, Lucifer is an archangel on the show, albeit twisted and evil, and literally the devil. Tough look for my guy Lucifer. If both of them give the two archangels their consent, it would literally be Dean and Sam fighting, while also Lucifer and Michael would be fighting. And that's really interesting. Instead of it being like, they have to go on this magical item quest. That's typical, that's repetitive. I mean, at points on the show, they do go for those, but then you get Jack. And Jack's another great subversive character because he is built up to be, on one end, the spawn of Lucifer. He is Lucifer's son. He is a Nephilim, and Nephilims are abominations. He's built up to be this evil creature that Sam and Dean have to end up hunting. But then on the other end, Castiel sees him as a savior, as one that will ultimately save the world again, because we all know that Sam and Dean have saved the world multiple times. However, I say that because initially you think Jack is going to be good based on how he's raised with Sam and Dean. And then as his story goes along, you still think he's going to be the one saving the world. But after he loses his soul, he starts to go down a dark path. Both of those foil each other because you think he could go one of these two ways, and you don't know until the very end. And so that's kind of what I'm talking about. Another one of the strengths that the show has is it has the same protagonists for the entire 15-season run. Sam and Dean are in literally every single episode. It raises the emotional stakes to a new level, and it helps you to relate to the characters and see their complicated past, how they wrestle with it in the present, and then go out and save the world even though they have their own personal problems. And speaking in the same vein of characters, the show has some really, really compelling characters. And examples of those are Dean, of course. See up here, if you want to see my character examination on him. Sam, his brother. Castiel, the angel that rescues Dean from hell, but eventually becomes like another brother to them. Jack, as I said previously, the Nephilim sired by Satan. Crowley, the king of hell, almost turned human, turned demon again, wrestles with his lost humanity, which is really interesting. Charlie Bradbury, who becomes one of Sam and Dean's best friends and future hunter, even though she was killed off in a crappy way, but it's fine. Rowena McLeod, Crowley's mother and very, very powerful witch who gets her own redemption arc. And then Bobby Singer, Sam and Dean's adopted father, kind of. He's more of a father figure, but family don't end in blood, as Bobby says. And so that's just an example of several other characters who just really stand out on the show. And it has one of the greatest redemption arcs in the form of Sam Winchester. The run of seasons 1 through 5 is almost flawless, especially with Dean and Sam's character development and inversions of their own desires coming to fruition. And that's really cool. One last reason is that ultimately you do get to see Sam and Dean come to accept their roles as hunters and as the dudes who are just ordinary guys, still with a complicated past, still with complicated upbringing, and you still see them save the world on a daily basis. It goes back to what I was saying about the hero's journey. They are your chosen ones, but there's more depth to them. They're complicated, they're human, they're short-sighted, they're emotional, they're dumb at points. Dean has like a 4-season arc where he doesn't grow. And honestly, he regresses. But he learns from that and becomes, in my opinion, the best character I've ever seen. That's just me. But yeah. And now, here are some reasons for opposing why Supernatural is a great show. Okay, so some of those drawbacks I was talking about to Supernatural. The first one that really, really bothers me are the constant changes to the already pre-established canon of the show. Like, what the heck? You can't just say an apple is deadly and then turn around and say an orange is going to kill you or an orange is a zombie when it hasn't been that way in the past. Just kidding. But that's kind of what the show does. It changes canon all the time, and that's so annoying. Storylines get repetitive. You see Dean making a deal to save Sam and getting the world screwed in the process, and you see Sam doing the same thing over and over again, and then you see the brothers lying to each other over and over again constantly. Not to mention, that gets old after a while. Another big issue I have with the show is the fan base definitely dictated a little bit too much of the story outcome. I hated how there is just way too much fan service in the actual plot of the show, which never should have been a thing. That's just my opinion, because a story should be what the writer's vision for it is, not what the fans think it should be, which is fine when it is, but at the same time, we know how Star Wars turned out. We know how Game of Thrones turned out. Endgame is a different story because the fan service actually felt earned. And the characters had some great payoff moments. Also, this is just my opinion, but I think it should have ended after season 5.
simply because that was the story Eric Kripke wanted to tell. And I'm glad it stayed on for another 10 seasons. But the self-contained story of Supernatural, to me at least, was best between seasons 1 and 5. Even though if we had never gone on for 10 more seasons, we never would have gotten Crowley, we never would have gotten Jack. Two of the greatest characters on the show, in my opinion. Jack is complex, he's relatable, he's goofy, he's innocent, but he's also just a badass. Crowley, what can you say about Crowley? He's snarky, he's at points very intelligent, he's powerful, but he's also a good commentary for the brothers to analyze their own personal lives and make good choices, while also reinforcing the idea of agency and free will, that ultimately your decisions can define the trajectory of your life. Another couple things real quick. Sam and Dean die way too many times and then get brought back to life. The running total for Dean's number of deaths on the show is like 120, and each time he gets brought back, and it's like, well, yes, those were emotional, those were for grounding the story in emotional stakes, but at the same time, you know they're going to come back because they're the heart of the show. They're what the show revolves around. So why are the writers suddenly like killing Sam or Dean off again if we know that they're going to be brought back? It's kind of frustrating. Now, all that being said, I know I just ragged on my favorite show of all time a lot. But that being said, Supernatural is a great show. It has great characters. The acting is fantastic. You see Jared and Jensen play multiple different versions of their own characters and even different characters, which is so cool. As you see Sam grow from this bratty little kid into a full-fledged badass man who is fully on board with his family's cause, you learn to love Sam. It takes a look at complex family relationships, and that is really interesting because the family structure in our society has changed. Supernatural examines what it would look like for your family to be the people that you choose, but also blood and sticking up for your blood all the time. And that matters because sometimes people can be hard to fight for, but you still have to fight for them, regardless of whether or not it's easy in the moment. And it's a great show all around. I'm willing to forgive all the canon changes and all the repetitive storylines because you get a full picture of what Sam and Dean really experience. I'll rank the show a firm 8.8 out of 10. And I encourage you to watch it, all 327 episodes of it. And let me know what you think in the comments down below. So like, subscribe, and let me know what you think. This has been my first In Defense Of episode. Stay tuned. There's a lot more to come. So have a good one, y'all. Merry Christmas. Peace.